Mother Nature is the womb of all life. She gives endlessly without reservation. But she's also the tomb. She kills and devours all living things. In childhood, a man looks to his mother to fulfill his needs. But on entering adulthood, he puts behind those childhood expectations. The passage isn't easy, and many men get stuck. They remain eternal sons, locked in a state of dependency on the mother. The passage rite is called slaying the dragon.
When we speak of the devouring unconscious or the devouring mother, it is that dangerous aspect of the dream world. The dream world is only beneficent and healing if we have a dialogue with this, but we are in actual life. We must not forget living. The devouring mother can be easily projected onto a plant or a big organization or an institute or a university.
Everywhere I look, I see the principle of mother-relatedness is breaking down. The institutions that once contained us, the church, family, marriage, even the economy, no longer provides that security.
The masculine intellectual overcoming of the devouring powers of the unconscious is not enough. It has to be done by the way one lives, not by the way one thinks.
Supposing I had no loving mother, not because she didn't love me, my mother, but because through her generations behind her, she didn't know how to look at me as I was, or at me as she saw me as she wanted to be, but it wasn't my reality.
Attis was the beloved of the Great Mother, Cybele, the Phrygian goddess of wild mountains, fertility, and ecstatic rites. She is the Great Mother, the one whose power could bless crops and cities, and whose rage can bring utter destruction. Attis is born under strange, ambiguous circumstances, already marked by the goddess's overwhelming presence. He grows into extraordinary beauty. He belongs to her, serves her, and is bound to her cult. Then something changes. Attis turns toward a mortal woman. He chooses a bride. He chooses ordinary human love, marriage, a life not centered around the goddess. Cybele cannot bear the separation. She appears at the wedding feast itself as an overwhelming, ecstatic force. What was a celebration turns into terror. She brings madness into the gathering. A frenzy spreads through the crowd, and everything collapses. Consciousness fractures. Attis is possessed by madness, and in that state, he no longer acts as a man choosing his path. He acts as one overtaken by a force greater than himself. He runs into the forest, under a pine tree, in the grip of possession. He castrates himself. She makes him mad. The separation from the mother is experienced as a catastrophe. The move toward independent eros is punished by psychic collapse. Masculine life is cut at its root. The young man who reaches for a woman loses his masculinity. The one who tries to leave the mother mutilates himself. The movement toward adult sexuality ends in self-destruction. In some tellings, Attis dies. In others, he is transformed. He becomes an eternal servant of the goddess, forever tied to her. The priests of Cybele, the Galli, would later imitate this act. In ecstatic ritual, they too would castrate themselves, becoming eunuchs devoted entirely to the Great Mother. Their masculinity and fertility were sacrificed to her alone. Symbolically, this is what happens when the Great Mother is not integrated, but remains omnipotent. Attis' castration is the collapse of independent will, of differentiation, of masculine direction. He does not simply lose his organ, he loses his capacity to stand apart. And that is why this myth is such a precise doorway into the mother complex. The story is extreme, but the pattern is precise. A man or a woman begins to step into their own life, toward relationship, sexuality, autonomy, toward a choice that does not revolve around the maternal presence. And suddenly, irrational guilt appears. Panic, depression, self-sabotage, a loss of vitality, a self-destructive impulse. The psyche reenacts Attis's archetypal pattern. The negative mother induces madness, paralysis, and a collapse of confidence so profound that the man unconsciously cuts himself off from his own desire and from life's energy. It can manifest as sexual dysfunction, an inability to act, a return home, an addiction, a career that replaces relationships entirely. The form changes, but the archetype stays the same. Attis stands at the threshold between mother and woman, belonging and becoming, devotion and differentiation. Psychologically, the task is to avoid mutilating desire and to get free of the mother's possession, to wrestle her power consciously, to recognize the guilt and panic as archetypal, to see that the madness is not proof that separation is wrong, but evidence that the complex has been touched. The work is to limit the mother's omnipotence, not to destroy her, to build an ego strong enough to endure her anxiety without obeying it, to take the step into life, even though fear and anxiety are present, to act while understanding what is being constellated. When the Great Mother is integrated rather than worshipped or feared, she becomes fertility rather than madness. The sun grows roots and direction at the same time, and that is the difference between possession and initiation. This myth asks us this question: what happens when a man tries to leave the Great Mother before he has wrestled her power within himself? This is the terrain we are about to enter.
This devouring mother, how does she come together in a man's unconscious in the first place?
The devouring mother on the personal level would be the fact that many women who are over-caring for their children try to keep them back from life. It begins by being anxious. Don't do that, it's dangerous. Don't do that, it's dangerous. Don't go to play out with the boys. You could fall and wound, or you get hit over the head. And by trying to keep the children too much in their clutches, and then we speak of devouring mothers. And such mothers also have trouble when their sons and daughters begin to date girls or boys. They say, I'm very much wishing that you married and I'm very glad, but that girl you bring home now, no, that is not the right girl for you, or that's not the right boy for you. So they keep the children in their clutches. But that is only the foreground of a woman who has exaggerated her maternal protective qualities. There's also an archetypal background. I once met the dream of a young man who was living still with Mama. He was 29 and had never had a girl in his room. So we seriously discussed the possibility of getting a room outside his mother's home. And he was terrified. He was a very sensitive, delicate boy, and his mother was a very brutal, strong personality. And he was just terrified of the moment to tell Mother, look here, I am going to take a room outside and I'm not going to live with you anymore. And when he was kind of trying to make up his mind, he dreamt that he had to slay the dragon. In that case, it means actually that though it seems such a, to us, little thing to tell Mother, I have to room, for him that was slaying the dragon. It was overcoming a monstrous neurotic difficulty within himself. His whole mother complex, not only facing the scene of his actual mother, but overcoming also the inertia and the anxiousness of his own mother complex. His mother had sowed in him an anxiousness, a fear of life. He had to overcome a terrific fear of life to make that step. And that is an archetypal motif all over the place that the young man has to do the heroic deed of killing his mother, or the mother dragon, or the mother demon, which is what is anxious or lazy or afraid of living a masculine life.
In working with the mother archetype, it's very important to remember that the feminine is a force of nature, an energy that can either give life or take it away. Children attempting to function in an atmosphere that cannot sustain life suffer bodily and psychically. They fear life itself. The compensating dream will be of a loving mother. Now, other children blessed with parents who are able to give them the honey of life may have strong, positive feminine images compensating for the loss in the culture. The one is an individual loss, the other a cultural loss. The full moon is one of those radiant images that can bring the dreamer into himself, then take him off the ground into a universal world of stars and spheres. And he can become lost in the harmony of that space. It is very important with such dreams that you recognize the compensation essential to stay on the ground and not be lost in the harmony of the spheres.
The unconscious itself can devour the human being. We now are discovering that the dream world is the most beneficent thing on earth, and that attending one's dream is the healthiest thing one can do. But why then has mankind also always been afraid of the dream world? There is a good reason for this. The dream world can also devour us by the way of daydreaming, of spinning neurotic fantasies, or by chasing unrealistic ideas. You have only to go into a lunatic asylum to see the victims of the dream world. One is living in the dream that he's Napoleon, sitting for 20 years like that in an asylum. Another, when you begin to talk to him, tells you confidently that he's really Jesus Christ, but nobody seems to understand him, and so on. They have been swallowed by the dream world. And that's why when we speak of the devouring unconscious, or the devouring mother, it is that dangerous aspect of the dream world. The dream world is only beneficent and healing if we have a dialogue with this, but we are in actual life. We must not forget living. The actual real life and the duties of actual real living must not be neglected. As soon as one begins to neglect outer life, one's own body, eating, doing one's ordinary job, and so on, then the dream world becomes dangerous. It can suck us away from reality and spin us into some neurotic or even psychotic unreality, into a fantasy world which is not constructive. So the dream world is only positive if it is in a living dialogue and in balance with a actually lived life.
Mother Nature is the womb of all life. She gives endlessly without reservation. But she's also the tomb. She kills and devours all living things. In childhood, a man looks to his mother to fulfill his needs. But on entering adulthood, he puts behind those childhood expectations. The passage isn't easy, and many men get stuck. They remain eternal sons, locked in a state of dependency on the mother. The passage rite is called slaying the dragon. Would you tell us some of the rituals which primitive societies had to break that dependency on the symbolic mother?
All the big transitions in life are in all societies have been accompanied by so-called what Genep calls rite de passage, rites of transition, to make a ritual to help people to make the step over the threshold. Now, the most famous one, which has been studied mostly by ethnologists, is the ritual of initiation, where the young men are initiated into the secrets of the tribal law and into the secrets of sexuality. They have to leave mother and their home. They are secluded in the bush. They are symbolically devoured by a maternal monster. They are reborn. They have to generally stand a lot of tortures. And then they are generally at the same time instructed with the secret law of the tribe and the religious traditions. And if somebody, a young man, has undergone all this ritual of transition, then he is afterwards a full member of the tribe. He's a man. And many tribes call the ones who are afraid, who are for some other reason not initiated, they say, he's not initiated, he's an animal. Meaning he has remained completely unconscious. He has remained in an unconscious animal conditions. He has not really made the step to being human.
Are there any societies where there is no rite of passage, where men remain in that state of dependency on the mother, where they stay animals?
Well, we have not many sociological matriarchies, but I read once a book about a South American Indian tribe where there was actually sociological, not religious, but sociological matriarchy. And there, the women were happy, fat, horse, ordering the men about, and the men were lean, submissive, nervous creatures who were planting the fields and doing the work for the women, kind of porters' figures. And positively, wealth, the world of the drives, sexuality, earthly happiness was blossoming. And negatively, there was no spirit whatsoever. A world of total stupidity, so to speak, of only living. Living very agreeably, but not thinking or having any ideas or spiritual realizations at all. And the men accordingly unhappy and submissive and rather poor creatures. But generally these things balance back and forth. There will be another generation of men who will in male protest again put the things into a middle position or try to put the things in a middle position. It seems to be, the ideal seems to be not that either the men dominate or the women dominate, but that there is a kind of equal relationship, a balance of opposites.
If a man has this mother complex, then how does he experience women in real life?
If a man has a too close tie to his mother, then he, especially a positive one, then he tends to idealize women. He sees in every woman the Beatrice of Dante, so to speak, or the Virgin Mary. Such men cannot approach women again with their lower parts, with sexually and in ordinary human life. Or they have a split anima situation. They admire a very unapproachable, lofty, beautiful girl from afar and satisfy their sexual desires with prostitutes and cannot bring the two ends together. They cannot put the princess and the bitch together, so to speak, in their psyche. And that is generally due to a too close tie to the mother in the man. He has to free himself from the mother. That's why, for instance, in one of the famous examples of such a princess in the tower, Rapunzel, she's imprisoned by a witch. It's the mother figure behind the scene, which brings forth the constellation. And then both lovers cannot meet on earth. And only when Rapunzel has come down on earth and he has erred around in the desert in misery and pain can they finally meet.
Dr. von Franz, we said earlier that a man with the mother complex fantasizes on an ideal woman who will fulfill his fantasies, gratify all his infantile desires. He wants a girl just like the girl that married dear old dad. How does that mother complex affect his personal relationships with a woman?
When a man has a mother complex, he's generally a split anima. Namely, on one side, his feminine side is he worships the feminine image too much. It's a kind of Virgin Mary or feminine Holy Ghost figure, the pure, wonderful woman, so to speak. And the other is the prostitute, with whom he has sex, but whom he thoroughly despises. This kind of split in the anima between the Virgin Mary and the prostitute is typical for for the mother complex. And such men then, if they have to approach a woman, they don't know how to do it, because the one they admire too much, she's too pure, you can't stretch out your hand and touch her. And the other is easily conquered, but no partner really, just something to have sex with. And such men have also in their own way trouble to relate to women because of that split anima situation.
Some men find their devouring mother out in life, in corporations, universities, or institutions of some kind.
I think one element of the devouring mother archetype is what one could call inertia. All big institutions have the tendency towards a certain inertia. They are not flexible. And therefore they are, so to speak, material blocks, situations which are just so. And as far as men have a mother complex, they feel, well, the universities are even called, were in the past called alma mater, the benevolent mother. And we see that whenever you have an institution, people tend to be infantile and to suck that institution for money, to ask for loans and stipendia, and to use them as benevolent mothers. The devouring mother can be easily projected onto a plant or a big organization or an institute or a university. They have even feminine names, and if in former times when one represented them, one represented the alma mater as a fat woman, and America is still represented by a fat woman holding up, at least she's holding up a light. That's making it a bit better.
But is there a light on top of that fat old woman? Everywhere I look, I see the principle of mother-relatedness is breaking down. The institutions that once contained us, the church, family, marriage, even the economy, no longer provides that security. What happens if the man's feelings are not transformed? If he stays locked into the maternal mode of relationship, with a woman fulfilling his needs and fantasies, or corporation or an institution or a university, some mother substitute? Is he, in fact, living out the Oedipal myth?
The Oedipal myth is a very complicated thing, in spite of what the Freudians say. And one cannot really look at it separately from the Greek tradition. When a man has to overcome the mother demon, and that was the moment when Oedipus had to answer the riddle of the Sphinx, who is a maternal mother demon, a devouring mother figure. He did it by giving a witty intellectual answer. That is a way how certain men escape the devouring mother. They do not slay the dragon, they outwit the dragon, so to speak. Nowadays, those are the men who study theoretical physics and become very intelligent and knowing all the mathematics, and therefore having a masculine realm of their own where their mother cannot follow them. They build up a kind of mental masculine world. Such an escape into the intellectual or scientific realm has been, for instance, done by the society around Socrates and Plato in Greece. That was an escape into a pure men's society of philosophers and scientists among themselves. Socrates didn't get on with his wife Xantippe at all, had a very unhappy marriage. In other words, the problem of the feminine and the getting away from the mother is only seemingly achieved. There must be another round in the battle with the great mother. And that is what the Oedipus myth mirrors. Oedipus thinks he has answered the riddle of the Sphinx and happily goes off having outwitted her. And she, in her evil, witch-like behavior, pretends to commit suicide. So to give him that illusion, now I've overcome the mother with the powers of the mind. And he just runs into marrying his own mother, with all the tragedy and the divine punishment which befalls him on account of that. So this myth shows the masculine intellectual overcoming of the devouring powers of the unconscious is not enough. It has to be done by the way one lives, not by the way one thinks. Just as it wouldn't help the young man who has to take a room for himself to understand that he has a mother complex and that all his neurotic symptoms comes from his mother tie. He has to actually take the other room and stand the battle.
If he takes the other room, does he have to understand why he's doing it?
Yes, certainly. Otherwise, at the next occasion, when he runs out of money, he moves back to Mama again. Perhaps he finds a disagreeable landlady in his first room, so he moves back home again. He has to understand why he does it, and that it is vitally essential for him, that it is not just a technical change in his life.
Well, it was about 4 years ago, and I was in residential work, and I had a breakdown. And my mother, who had been dead then about 13, 14 years, every night I kept dreaming of her. And somewhere up above me, she kept beckoning me to go to her. And I kept saying, no, I'm not ready to come yet. And she kept saying, you've got to come. I want you. I want you. And I said, well, you never wanted me when you was alive. And I'm not leaving Bob. And that's my husband. And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And in the end, in one of my dreams, I told my mother all the things I'd felt about her when she was alive and got it all off my chest. And I didn't have any more. But it was awful because I was frightened to go to sleep because I knew, this dream would recur every night. But she didn't want me when she was alive. And I thought, well, no way you're going to get me now. So it really was horrible.
Supposing I had no loving mother, not because she didn't love me, my mother, but because through her generations behind her, she didn't know how to look at me as I was, or at me as she saw me as she wanted to be, but it wasn't my reality. So somewhere along the line, I developed a craving for sweetness, a craving for nourishment, for life. I happened to put this onto chocolate or any other food that was sweet and could give me that feeling of being loved. So I see the chocolate. I want the chocolate. If I have a weak ego, the ego cannot tell me, no, you shouldn't have any more chocolate. So I come past the ego and go for the chocolate. I go right up through that unchallenged line. Supposing I try to say to myself, I won't have the chocolate. It may be that the archetype will say, I will. And I don't care what you think, what your ego wants to do. I want the chocolate. I've always had the chocolate. I always will have it. And I will go direct to the chocolate. The ego has been wiped out. And we are really in a complex situation. From the Jungian point of view, this is a very dangerous space to be in because the ego has lost its power, the complex has taken over, and the archetypal energy is at work. Now, in a well-working psyche, the ego is strong enough to hold that complex in abeyance. And yes, let it develop, let it mature, but not to allow the archetype to take over. The archetype will be more powerful than the ego later on. When, for example, you have an ego strong enough to write, well trained that it can play music, and the ego can be forgotten while the archetypal energy is moving through. Or in prayer, for example, the ego is out of the road, the prayer is coming through. The archetypal energy is essential to life in the dimension that we as human beings relate to it. The tragedy in our culture is that so many people do not believe in symbolic language. And so they try to satisfy a spiritual yearning with a physical food or alcohol or drugs or silk underwear, whatever the addiction is. That cannot work. There is no satiation point for a spiritual longing by physical means. So long as that symbol is not alive as a living symbol, it cannot do its work to bring us into our totality.
Thank you for watching. I hope you've gained more clarity, consciousness, and the next step toward your potential wholeness. I invite you to meet with me and work on your current challenge together, and to join one of the circles I hold space for, to be seen in a safe space of mutual expression and understanding. I wish you the best.